Hello and welcome to episode 45 of The Garden Log with me, Ben Darg. I am a gardener and this is a gardening podcast. No gardening for me today. It is the day of rest, and so instead I went to Richmond Park for a lovely walk in the blazing October sunshine. This year did such a special job with the summer that it won't let it go. It is like an irritating child who makes a room full of grown-ups laugh by doing something and then repeats it ad infinitum because they know there's a reaction. And in the end, you're just almost being polite. You're saying, well, yes, the sun's all very well and good, but we've seen it. Now we want some sideways wind and torrential rain, don't we? Well, I do, anyway. But it was a nice walk. The deer are all antlered up, and the stags are doing that most primal mating call they do, that snoring, snorting huff that really is the essence of wanting a shag. It's seduction boiled down to its purest elements. No tablecloths and candlelight. Here, thank you very much. Lots of people on the park, lots of people who had been tricked by the chilly morning into heading out all decked out in hats and scarves, and then had been ambushed by the blazing sunshine. So there's probably a lot of discarded knitwear lying around on Richmond Park. If anyone's a fan of scavenging, foraging for knitwear, then they should go out tomorrow morning. When I was in the park, I wandered around a bit, and then we went to the Isabella Plantation. The Isabella Plantation is a small section of the park. It's fenced off, but free to enter, and it's very famous as a winter garden. There's all sorts of corner stems and willow stems and exciting tree bark in there. But it's also fairly good as an autumn garden. There's some good colour in there. There are some taxodiums which are doing a scruffy, shabby change into that orange toilet brush look. And there are also a few euonymus that look quite good. And then I found the most fantastic camellia out in full flower. This was Camellia sasanqua, and the cultivar, I believe, was Sasanqua rubra. And sasanqua camellias are early, but I'm more used to seeing them out in January or maybe at Christmas. There was a very nice white one that I bought once at a camellia festival at Chiswick House, and I gave it to my mother, and it blooms in a pot there. But to see them out in so magnificent force in October was wonderful. So I've put a picture of that fantastically blooming camellia up on Instagram. You can find it by searching for Gardener Darg. Wandering on Richmond Park aside, it was a week of preparations. October is a good month for getting things ready. The ground is still workable. You can start big projects. You can start earth moving and not make too much of a soup of your garden. So there's a bit of digging, and there's quite a lot of trips out to select plants for the projects that will keep us going over winter. There was an excitement to this week. Everything I did felt like it was advancing the garden. It wasn't one of those weeks of pure maintenance fighting where you work as hard as you can and you mow and you trim and you weed and you hoe just to keep everything in one place. We are well and truly on the march to beauty. Best not to fall behind. Let's get straight on with the week in gardening. Welcome to the week in gardening, a week that started damp and ended blazing. It started very wet indeed, actually. Monday morning had one of those days where the air is completely swapped for a mixture of water and darkness. I left the house and stepped into a full face of mizzle. It was actually quite upsetting because I leave my helmet outside quite often due to carelessness, and so when I put it on, all of the padding was soaked with freezing cold water, which instantly dropped down the back of my neck and woke me up in a way that was probably quite useful for health and safety. Anyway, by the time I got to work, I was slightly sodden, and so threw myself into things. The first thing that I threw myself into was a car, because we went out to a nursery. We took a trip to buy plants for the coming projects. We have two very exciting projects coming up. The first is the construction of a winter garden in a new area of the garden where the hard landscapers are just finishing their work with cement mixers and trowels. The second is a complete overhaul of one of the herbaceous borders. And this was inspired by a trip I took a couple of weeks ago to Regent's Park. And I was walking in Regent's Park in that heavily gardened bit between the rose garden and the ornamental lake, near where the Victorian bandstand is. And I saw that part of that great long border had been completely stripped out, and it was reduced to wonderfully turned over soil. And then upon this soil had been sprayed in line marking paint little blobs like you might find in a painting by numbers picture. And these blobs were to be the new homes of herbaceous plants they were going to plant for the next year. And I saw this and I felt a real tingle of envy for these people, this chance to start afresh, a whole new border bursting into life, no awkward old shrubs to deal with, no cultivars that are just hanging around being okay and not contributing something. And I thought, gosh, if this makes me feel so intensely about some of my own borders, then maybe I should rip them out. And so, why not? Why not? There's a border that has brought the garden down this summer. It's been full of plants, but the plants haven't been well chosen, and they're not particularly good plants. They're plants that have found their way into the border over many years of gardening and don't go together. And I think we're going to take them all out and start again. My colleague is going to take the design lead for this particular border, which is very exciting because I believe it will be the first full border he has designed. And we had a meeting on Monday morning in a coffee shop with cake to talk through some of his ideas, and they look very good indeed. I think it's going to be a skyline sort of border full of spires and spikes and exciting things. So we went off to the nursery and picked out things that could, as closely as possible, match the ideas that he had jotted down in a notebook. And we came away with some really lovely plants on order. Some things that I think are going to be quite spectacular. And some combinations that I think will work well. There's a wonderful apricot digitalis that he's picked out. I think he's got about 30 of those. And then that's going to go with, I don't know if you know the digitalis parviflora, the cultivar milk chocolate, which is a very distinctive brownish sort of thing. It's unique in a way. And I'm very happy about this because I could have done this myself and chosen those plants that I fall back on fairly regularly or go my own way, but I didn't know if I'd have learned as much as I will from letting someone else take the reins and seeing how it goes for him. So that's going to be very, very exciting. I'll talk more about those plants when they arrive. Just as a teaser, there's Sanguisorba Red Thunder going in there, and there's quite a lot of Thalictrum, a white form of Thalictrum. I think it's splendid white. And then other things, there's Persicarias. There's that very, very good, well, it's got a very good reputation. Its reputation precedes it. That very good Rudbeckia, the early one. Is it Rudbeckia? I think it's Early Bird Gold. and we're going to get some of that in and other plants at the front to splash out. It could be quite an interesting bit of planting in the end. So stay tuned for more on the development of the new herbaceous border. On Tuesday we were in the meadowy areas. Another damp day. This the sort of day that you know isn't going to dry out, but isn't actually going to get you wet. It's one of those days where the air has almost a homeopathic dose of water in it. You knew that it was entirely air, but it still felt like it was doing watery things. My shoes got very wet, which meant that the grass was very wet. The first time this year that the dew has soaked all the way through my boots over the course of a day. We were giving the meadow a really heavy, hard cut in order to sprinkle more yellow rattle seeds on there. We put an extra kilogram of yellow rattle out just to make sure that we get it established. And cutting the meadow very low meant there were patches of mud and scuff for the seeds to bury themselves in. I did a little pacing in the meadow just to see if I could get a preview of what sort of wildflowers we might get coming in next year. And I think it looks like it's going to be quite vetch heavy. There's going to be vetches and vetchlings and vetchettes and all of the vetches generally. And there's lots of trefoils, which is lovely. I think meadow buttercups will have lots of, which look fantastic en masse. And we didn't get enough of them last time. Meadow cranesbill, which would be great if we could get some of that. I can see a few little rosettes of that. There's knapweed, which we had lots of last year. And hopefully other things will come, things uninvited, gate crashers. Last year there was a Lychnis coronaria, which came from, I don't know, a garden somewhere. There's not many gardens nearby, but that was nice to see flowering there, so maybe that will set up a colony for itself. The day ended with a belt on the lawnmower snapping, as all good days outside do. I also planted a few bulbs, a little mixture of some dwarf form daffodils, I think tete-a-tete, Tazetta, and then another one, and Mascari. That's that classic mix that's almost cartoonish in its joyful blues and yellows in the spring. And we're planting that around very artificial areas of the garden where there are play features for grandchildren, things like that. Things that will benefit from artificial cheer rather than studied naturalism. It was a very fine Tuesday, and it led almost seamlessly into Wednesday. On Wednesday we started removing old stuff from the border. And it was hard, actually. It's hard to dig out plants and discard them entirely. There were lots and lots of hemerocallis root, those quite tuberous roots. And it was almost a torment to wheel them off to the compost heap. There was a struggle. I could feel myself heading towards the nursery grounds to divide and pot up. But then I was thinking that I've been in the garden for 2 years and I could not remember what this hemerocallis looked like. It made that much impression on me. I don't think I've ever talked about it on the podcast. If anyone can go through all of the back catalogue, then maybe I can rescue them still. But that meant that I don't think it's a spectacular plant, and the compost heap is so hungry it needs feeding. So they went into the hot maw of the decaying mound. And it's almost beautiful to see. It's a border that has played on the back of my mind as not being very strong for a long time. To see it as bare soil was a relief. What it must feel like, I believe, is someone who has been so worried about being crap at their job, so worried about being fired, that for the last decade all they've thought about is the fact that they are clinging to this employment by a thread, and then one day it happens and they do get fired. The boss says, sling it, and then the next day you wake up blissful. I'm the same. I no longer have to worry about how those sedums are standing up and whether that phlox needs deadheading. A new start, a new beginning. I also took a trip to another nursery on Wednesday, this one specialising more in the woody material, and picked out some nice acers and a couple of good pines, some little Pinus nana in 35-litre pots that are going to go into the winter garden. More of which we'll talk about next week. So that was a good day as well. It's always fun to go around one of those nurseries with your little tags and tag the tree you want. You get to walk around it from all directions and look into its branches and see the spread and the form and try and picture the thing in 10 years' time. I like seeing what other people have picked out as well. Or the best thing, you don't get this in all nurseries, but sometimes nurseries pick out other gardeners and garden designers. These are trade nurseries. They pick out other gardeners and garden designers' stuff and leave them all somewhere. So you can go along and say like, oh, old Jennifer Plant Some More has decided to go for verbena and ferns again. And you get to go and see all of their plans and their things and steal their ideas away from them, which is absolutely brilliant. I didn't do much stealing of ideas this week, but I will steal more. So that was Wednesday, and then on to Thursday. And Thursday I was studying my garden history. We looked at some maps, which was very good fun. Old Ordnance Survey maps of gardens, charting the difference between them from 1864 to 1972. As people pointed out, it's a big old game of spot the difference. But you know all about that, so I will not dwell. In fact, I will go on to Friday. And Friday could not have been more of a contrast to Monday. It was a slow burning rise to a glorious afternoon, one of those days that starts misty. We've reached the stage now where dawn breaks as I ride the train out of London. And that should be available on prescription. Dawn on an empty train as it rolls through the English countryside with mist and sunshine just peeking through could cure the most serious of lingering maladies. I suspect. I am not a doctor. It remained foggy and moody and mysterious for the first few hours of work. And those first few hours of work were spent shoveling compost and topsoil. This is the compost and topsoil for the winter garden. The landscapers have built this flight of steps through the middle of it, and my job now is to soften them and make them sit within the wider garden with the planting, but also to make something that is bright, a beacon, a thing to look at when the nights are long and the days are cold. Because it's new ground, or ground that's been heavily driven over and had landscaping materials dumped on it, we started by digging it over with a digger or a backhoe for the Americans, and then put on about 8 tons of new stuff. 4 tons of topsoil, grade A topsoil, and then 4 tons of mushroom compost. And mushroom compost, as I've talked about before, is the compost that they grow mushrooms in, not compost made from mushrooms. It's a mixture of lime and horse crap, basically. It's very, very good if mixed with topsoil, because topsoil has nothing in it. It turns to silty sludge if you try and make a new border out of it. So the first few hours were spent in the mist, and then it slowly got brighter as the wheelbarrows made their way across the garden. I'm trying to learn a new shoveling technique. I realised that when I shovel from a bulk bag, I always use the exact same grip. I put my left hand on the end of the shovel handle, and I put my right hand on the neck, and I work it that way. So I get a good heave with the right bicep, and I press with the left hand. So I'm going to develop an incredibly asymmetrical body by the time I'm 65 and my shovel is finally confiscated. So I tried to do some ambidextrous shoveling, and it really didn't work. I think I've reached my limitations. I can do it, but it takes a very, very long time, and then I feel bad about myself and my work rate. If anyone has any tips for teaching old dogs new tricks, then they can write to the Garden Log podcast at gmail.com. By the end of the day, we had all of the new soil in place, and I ran a rotavator over it to really mix in that topsoil and the new compost, and get it looking like a beautiful cereal. Like the kind of cereal that you might use if there were not enough fibre in your diet. Some sort of healthy, wholesome, textured grain. That's what the new bed looked like. Very nice indeed. And that left me happy. It was a job with a definite finish. I like weeks that finish. It's like with music. A song that finishes with a great big trumpet blast and a whack of the drum, as opposed to one that drifts off in an endless diminution. We finished with a bang, we had one last cup of tea, and went home. My recommendation this week is a book. No great surprises there. This is the book that I mentioned a few weeks ago. I said that I'd bought myself a birthday present. Well, this is it. I had to call it a birthday present because otherwise I couldn't justify the price. It cost £45. And the book is The Gardens of Anne Maynard. Anne Maynard is one of my favourite designers, and this is a great big slab of a book full of pictures and words. I was so excited when this arrived. I got it posted to work, and I showed a colleague this vast package that had arrived and said, look, it's my book, it's my Maynard book. And they said politely, I think, well, give me a look. And we opened it up and then flicked through it, and the pictures, I don't know, they seemed somehow underwhelming to both me and my audience. And I don't know why, because it really is a fantastically inspirational and brilliant book. I think that the gardens don't photograph in the same way that even the most derivative of a new perennial style garden does. You can't just go and shoot the garden at dawn through some wafty grass. These gardens are more structural. I think of Anne Maynard as a dewy kind of designer. His gardens seem permanently coated in damp. He uses a lot of green, a lot of old-fashioned sort of planting. It's a timeless sort of gardening. Lots of climbing roses in pink tones scrambling up ancient manor houses. And very distinctive structural forms as well. The classics is pleached fruit trees, pleached crab apples, and topiary in interesting forms, in forms that look almost like fish heads. What I like about this book is that the words are by the designer himself, so that he talks you through what he felt creating each of the gardens featured in this book, where he drew his inspiration from, why he tried a certain thing, and whether it worked. I like the fact that he is completely unashamed in saying how much other gardens and plantings have influenced him, particularly Rousham, it seems. He recognises the importance of good gardeners to good design. He says that the best gardens have a sense of enjoyment in the activity of gardening itself, and without that, however good the design of a garden is, it will lack a vitality. And there's a buzz in gardens where there is an appetite for gardening, for seeking out unusual plants, and for refreshing the plantings and experimenting with their plant matter. I think that's very true, and I really love the fact that in this book there is a page of pictures of the gardeners in these various gardens at work. And although it does lack that one stunning shot, that cover shot, as it were, the pictures in here are a work of quiet beauty. I think that it is a book to be flicked through. I've had it out on the kitchen table since getting it over a month ago, and we've had various guests to stay and people around to visit, and they find themselves opening it up and browsing through and seeing the fruit and the roses and getting immersed in a way that they wouldn't with many of the other gardening books that are lying around the place. And it should be, I think, taken in these little bits, a bit like the gardens themselves. Arne Maynard likes gates. I think ideally he would like all his gardens to be seen through some well-crafted railings, a little glimpse, a vignette, a promise of romance and mystery and soft abundance. And that's what you get from this book. You also get a considerable dent in your bank balance, but if you can afford it, then I recommend picking up a copy. Or just come round to my house and sit at the kitchen table. I'll make you a cup of tea and you can flick through it from there. Everyone is always welcome. Right, going back a year ago and listening to what I was up to this time last year, I think we must have had more leaf fall this time last year, because I spent quite a lot of time in that episode 3 of the Garden Log, talking about different methods of leaf collection. I tell my favourite story about how they collect the rubbish on Hampstead Heath, so for that alone it's worth listening to that episode. If you don't want to do that, which I completely understand, then I'll see you back here next week for episode 46 of the Garden Log. I hope that you all have a wonderful week, whatever you are up to, gardening or otherwise. Thank you and goodbye.